Greetings. I'm Colonel Wynn Adkins, Commander of the United States Army Aviation Brigade. On behalf of Major General Omar Jones, Commanding General of the Military District of Washington, welcome to 2021's Holocaust Remembrance Observance. In 1979, the United States Congress established the Days of Remembrance as the nation's annual commemoration of the Holocaust. The intent of the observance is not only to promote awareness in the community, but to provide families and friends an opportunity to honor and remember the victims and survivors of the Holocaust.
Hello, I'm CW5 Michael Barrett, Command Chief Warrant Officer of the United States Army Aviation Brigade. This year's theme, Lessons from the Holocaust, Acknowledge, Preserve, and Honor, not only remembers the millions of Holocaust victims who tragically lost their lives, but also honors the survivors. Between 1933 and 1945, the German government, led by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, carried out systematic persecution and murder of over 6 million European Jews. This genocide is known as the Holocaust. The Nazi regime also persecuted and murdered millions of other people it considered politically, racially, or socially unfit. The survivors who lived and endured the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime remind us to never forget.
I am Command Sergeant Major Greg Galassi, the United States Army Aviation Brigade Command Sergeant Major. In Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize recipient Elie Wiesel's memoir, Night, a work based on his experience as a Jewish prisoner in the Auschwitz and Buchenwald concentration camps, he states, "Wherever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at the moment, become the center of the universe." Remembering the Holocaust ties the past and present together with Wiesel's simple but powerful message: never forget, never again.
Memory is what shapes us. Memory is what teaches us. We must understand that's where our redemption is.
I think the important thing to understand about this cataclysmic event is that it happened in the heart of Europe. Germany was respected around the world for its leading scientists, its physicians, its theologians. It was a very civilized, advanced country. It was a young democracy, but it was a democracy. And yet it descended not only into social collapse, but world war and eventually mass murder.
A strong man came to power in Germany whose ideas were that Germany has to create a national community which would include only the Aryan race, which he considered superior, and all the people who did not belong to the Aryan race could be eliminated. With planning and propaganda, he was able to convince most of the German people to go along with him. Insensitive to what happened to the Jews who had basically been their former neighbors. And he managed to build concentration camps and killing centers and finally gas chambers to annihilate 6 million Jews, and at the same time also millions of others murdered in a systematic government-sponsored way.
And it's made up of so many people who participated in different ways, who made it possible.
People who follow orders without question. bystanders who watch and do nothing. Ordinary men and women simply going with the flow.
The events and the results of the Holocaust were so devastating. It was an extreme that we can barely imagine.
So mind-boggling that the temptations to forget and to repress, to just put it out of mind, are very real.
But we remember. We remember because it is an unthinkable scar on humanity. We need to understand what human beings are capable of.
We gather today to mourn the loss of so many lives and celebrate those who saved them, honor those who survived, and contemplate the obligations of the living.
Days of Remembrance is our nation's annual commemoration of the Holocaust. This time that was both a blight on the history of humanity, but also a shining moment for the people who were brave enough to put an end to it.
We are remembering, first and foremost, all the victims. And that is not only the Jewish victims, but there were many non-Jewish victims. Of course, the Jews were the primary target.
The millions of innocent people, including my family and friends, who were killed because they were of the wrong religion, because they had no means of protecting themselves.
It's also important to remember the rescuers. These were people who risked not only their own lives, sometimes the lives of their family, to save a fellow human being. And we also remember our American soldiers who were fighting to win World War II, and in the course of that, liberated these concentration camps.
Those that arrived at the camps in 1945 and were just horrified with what they saw.
That was a huge task for the American soldiers to help bring humanity back to these people who had been dehumanized for years, to give them medical care.
Looking back allows us to understand how important it is for us to serve in a country where we have the strength and the might and the will to defend those that are defenseless.
So Days of Remembrance is an opportunity for us to remember the suffering that was and the efforts that were made to put an end to such suffering. And it's a call to conscience today in our world to make sure that we aren't the silent ones standing by, contributing to the suffering of others.
In 1945, at the end of the war, I would have thought that there would never be another Holocaust, that the world was so shocked by what had happened, that the world would not permit that. And yet you see what happened in Bosnia, what happened in Rwanda, what happened in Darfur. So there are still millions of people being persecuted because of their ethnicity.
It's really a moral challenge to us to do more in our own lives when we confront injustice or hatred or genocide.
Those who suffered and died in the Holocaust, we can honor them today by not being silent. Remembering ties the past and the present together with a powerful, simple thread. This is not right.
The important thing is that one should not become indifferent entitled to the suffering of others, that one should not stand by and just raise one's hands and say, there's nothing I can do, I'm just a little one person. Because I think what every one of us does matters.
It's not enough to curse the darkness of the past. Above all, we have to illuminate the future. And I think that on the day of remembrance, the most important thing is to remember the humanity that is in all of us, to leave the world better for our children and for posterity.
Our guest speaker for today is Chaplain Stern, who is a grandson of a Holocaust survivor and currently serving as a chaplain for the Military District of Washington. Today, he will be sharing some powerful words to remember the survivors, the liberators, and also inspire each one of us to make a difference. It is my great honor to introduce to you Chaplain Mindy Stern.
The United States Congress established the Days of Remembrance to memorialize the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust and the millions of non-Jews who were victims of Nazi persecution. This year we commemorate 76 years since the end of World War II, memorializing the hope, resilience, and survival during the horror years of the Holocaust. Those who survived the atrocities are the very definition of the word survivor. They did what was necessary to survive, using a little more than an extreme will to live. Today, we remember them as people who, despite being forced to live in a human-made hell, chose not to let go of that extreme will to live. As the world grapples with the ongoing pandemic, some people may default to self-pity, wondering when we will go back to our normal lives. As we mourn the thousands who perished and embrace those who are affected by this invisible enemy, we pause to commemorate the Holocaust and apply lessons of resiliency to our lives now. During remembrance observances, we recall the sheer number of those lost during the Holocaust. The people who were dehumanized by losing their identity as individuals, some killed on the spot, others identified with a number on their arm. These people you may have never heard of. People that turn with time into statistics. Yet today, I want to mention some of these names here. Samuel Stern, Abraham Stern, David Stern, Zissel Stern. These are not just any names. Rather, these are my family. These are some of the cards that my grandfather wrote in witness to the atrocities of the war. These are his brothers and parents who the Nazis killed in Auschwitz as his sisters watched but survived to share it with the world years later. As a story I heard from my grandmother, who at the tender age of 12 was sent with a kinder transport, where she was separated from her family, knowing she may never see them again. Yet today, we remember. Today, we remember all the victims of terror here at home and around the world, the victims of injustice, and the victims of inequality. We specifically remember the victims of the greatest crime of man against man. The young, the old, the innocent. The 1.5 million children starved, shot, given lethal injections, gassed, burned, and turned to ash. All because they were deemed guilty of the crime of being Jewish. The sheer scale of the Holocaust can overwhelm us. On September 11th, 2001, 3,000 people died in the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The worst terrorist incident in American history. During the Holocaust, on average, 3,000 Jews were murdered every day for 5.5 years. If we were to observe a moment of silence for each victim of the Holocaust, the silence would last more than 11 years. Today, we remember. We remember what happens when hate takes hold of the human heart and turns it to stone. What happens when victims cry for help and there is no one listening. What happens when one side silences the other simply for voicing an opposing opinion. What happens when society allows politics to dictate their personal views. What happens when government turns innocent people into political dissidents. What happens when people follow blindly without seeking the truth. What happens when humanity fails to recognize that those who are not in our image are nonetheless in God's image. Today, we remember. We remember the Jews. More than 1 in 2 of every Jew in Europe. Young and old, rich and poor, pious and assimilated. And 1.5 million children. A whole murdered generation. For these I weep, reads the book of Lamentations. My eyes run with tears, and there's no one to comfort me, no one to restore my spirit. We remember the victims. We remember those who found the strength of the human spirit and chose to act courageously. Those who could have sat silently like many others, however, they chose to act. With their courageous acts, countless lives were saved. One such man is Sir Nicholas Winton, who organized a kinder transport with which my grandmother was saved. Sir Winton was not Jewish. He could have observed the war from afar. However, in his own words, his motto, "Don't be content in your life just to do no wrong. Be prepared every day to do good." Today, we remember. We remember the liberators who sacrificed their lives to save the lives of their fellow human beings. As Chaplain Eli Bonin wrote to his wife after he liberated Dachau with the 42nd Infantry Division, "Nothing you can put into words would adequately describe what I saw there. The human mind refuses to believe what the eyes see. All the stories of Nazi horrors are not exaggerated. Rather, they are underestimated." His words echo the account of the American troops who witnessed the atrocities of the Nazis. As General Eisenhower wrote to the Chief of Staff, General Marshall, attempting to describe what the troops have seen, "The evidence so overpowering as to leave me a bit sick," Eisenhower wrote. "I visited every nook and cranny. It was his duty, he felt, to be in a position from then on to testify about these things in case there ever grew up at home the belief that the stories of Nazi brutality were just propaganda." Foresight to modern day. Humanity must continue to remember places like the death camps, Dachau and Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald, Majdanek and Mauthausen, Warsaw and Birkenau. And let us not think it will not happen again. As in some form or another, it is happening again, and we are witnessing it daily with reports about extremism, anti-Semitism, communism, fascism, Jew hatred, and the BDS movement. We must recognize hatred whenever and wherever we see it, especially when it is disguised as law or policy. And we firmly say, we will not let anyone knock us down. Terrorism will not win. As a Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel said, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the oppressed. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men or women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. And today, we recognize the difference between victims and survivors. Victims live in the past. Survivors look to the future. And so, we honor the survivors who somehow found incredible strength, the strength of the human spirit, with perseverance and an absolute iron will. They looked toward the future, and with their stubborn faith in life itself, they married, had children, grandchildren, and refused to let evil have the final word or the final victory. And so, the survivors became my heroes. They built a life for themselves, and after only a few years, they did look back and told their stories, taught them to their children, and bore witness so that the world would know these things happened, not just through books or films, rather through the words of those who were there. To remember them and their stories, not as victims, but as heroes whose whole lives after the Holocaust were a way of thanking God for life by enhancing the lives of others. We cannot change the past, but the survivors have shown us that if we fight hate with love, brutality with compassion, and death with an unconquerable dedication to life, we can bring a better future out of the wreckage of destruction. To the next generation, we must say, we hope you become aware that even one person can make a difference in the world. We must keep the memory of those who perished alive by increasing in acts of goodness and kindness to make this world a better place for all. We must harness the human spirit and celebrate diversity instead of being threatened by it. We must recognize the dignity of difference. We must understand that one who is not in my image is still in God's image, even if their color, culture, religion, or opinion is not mine. This is why we must take time to remember. We must ensure that history does not repeat itself, and that we will remain strong to fight for freedom, for liberty, in a world where, regardless of religion or race, we all live peacefully. On this great day of commemoration, may God bless us all, the survivors, the liberators, and each one of us who will take it upon ourselves to be inspired to make a difference. May we have the courage to fight hate in the name of our shared and undeniable humanity. May we never be afraid to fight for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness where no one has to live in fear. While we know that we cannot change the past, we can. We must change the future. And so on this day of remembrance, we commit ourselves to one simple act. Yizkor, remember. At this time, please join me in observing a moment of silence, followed by a memorial prayer. Let us pray. Av rachamim shochen b'meromim. May the Father of mercy who dwells on high in his profound compassion remember with mercy the pious, the upright, and the innocent, the communities who lost their lives for the sanctification of the divine name. Grant rest in your divine presence in the lofty abode of the holy to the souls of our brothers and sisters, 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who suffered death at the hands of the cursed Nazis and their associates. Lest we forget the victims of terror in our land and around the world, O Lord, please do not be silent and show no restraint on behalf of the blood that has been spilled like water. Yizkereim Eloheinu letova im she'ar tzadikei olam. May God remember them with favor, together with the other righteous of the world, and avenge the spilled blood of his servants. Therefore the Master of mercy shall care for them under the protection of his wings for all eternity. And may the souls of the victims be bound in the bond of everlasting life. Amen.